At Margaret Vance's funeral, my husband Richard burst into the funeral home carrying his mistress, Brittany's son, right in front of me. He uncovered the urn and had the young child urinate inside. My eyes burned with fury. I frantically rushed forward, trying to save the ashes, but the bodyguards held me down tightly on the ground. The urine-soaked ashes smeared across my face and got into my mouth, and my tears wouldn't stop falling. Richard Sterling explained flatly. Leo had been crying ceaselessly at night, and a spiritual advisor claimed urinating in ashes could calm night terrors and bring good health. A metallic taste filled my throat. Before I could resist, Richard Sterling turned and left, leaving only his cold voice echoing in the air. Dry the ashes and bring them tomorrow. Leo needs them again tomorrow night. Suppressing the hatred in my heart, I turned to my childhood friend, Marcus, who stood nearby, and said gravely, "I'll give you my company shares if you help me bring down Blackwood Industries. Are you in?" Marcus Thorne froze, and after a long moment, he looked at me with a heavy gaze. "I don't want shares, I want you." I was silent for a moment, then said decisively, "All right." Once Marcus Thorne had left, I looked at the mess on the floor, and tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. After dealing with Margaret Vance's ashes, I hastily buried Margaret Vance to prevent that pair of lunatics from going insane again. That night, a message from Richard Sterling arrived. He said, "Remember to come over tomorrow." My face was grim. I printed out the divorce papers, and then finally fell into a deep sleep. When I arrived at Richard Sterling and Brittany Hayes's suburban house early the next morning, the main gate was tightly shut, showing no intention of opening for me. Before I could knock, Richard Sterling's voice came through the security camera. "Kneel and wait for Brittany to wake up and apologize, because you didn't reply to my messages last night." Brittany got angry. My face was expressionless. "Do you think I'm beneath contempt? I'm here to sign the divorce papers with you." The next moment, the door opened, and several staff members rushed out and pinned me tightly to the ground. Their voices were mocking. "If you're told to kneel, then kneel. Mr. Sterling said you can only get up when Mrs. Hayes wakes. Mr. Sterling said you surely wouldn't bring the ashes. So aged already sent men to dig up the grave." My face went pale, ignoring the divorce matter. I hastily got up, intending to rush to the cemetery. A sharp smack. I was struck hard by a slap, falling to the ground, my cheek scraping against the concrete, leaving streaks of blood. When I looked up, Margaret Vance's ashes had reappeared before my eyes. My skin crawled, my voice trembled uncontrollably. "Richard Sterling, that was your mother too. You're an animal." For the urn, I desperately fought with the bodyguards again and again. Each time I was just about to reach it, the urn was thrown to another spot. My whole body was shaking. My heart lodged in my throat. After what felt like an eternity, Brittany Hayes and Richard Sterling finally arrived. Strolling in, Brittany Hayes's eyes full of amusement, and Richard Sterling gazing at her with doting affection. "Sister, your little clown show was quite entertaining." The anger and hatred accumulated over the past 2 days erupted at this moment. I rushed forward recklessly and shoved Brittany Hayes to the ground. A cry of pain rang out, and Richard Sterling's face darkened. "Stop. If you don't stop, I'll smash that old hag's urn." My reason instantly snapped back, and I looked at Richard Sterling in shock and fury. The urn, raised high, instantly slipped from his hand. My pupils dilated. I screamed at the top of my lungs. "No." My body reacted faster than my thoughts, and I lunged at Richard Sterling, but it was all too late. I watched helplessly as the urn fell in front of me. A dull thud, like a heavy hammer striking my heart. Margaret Vance's fine, white bone fragments, scattered lightly, without an ounce of dignity, onto the dirty ground in front of me, mixing with the dirt. Time seemed to freeze at that moment. "Mom," a broken sob escaped from deep within my throat, tinged with the taste of blood. Richard Sterling seemed startled by the sudden turn of events, but the surprise on his face vanished in an instant, replaced by a twisted glee. "Serves her right." His voice was low, yet it was like a poisoned icicle, stabbing fiercely into my eardrums. "If you hadn't insisted on bullying Brittany, how would that old hag's ashes have ended up on the ground? It's all because of you." I knelt on the ground, tears streamed down my face, blurring my vision. The cold liquid splashed onto Margaret Vance's ashes, spreading dark stains. I ignored the tears on my face, and reached out with trembling hands, trying to gather the scattered ashes from the ground, piece by piece. "I'm sorry, Mom. Your daughter is so sorry. It's all my fault." Richard Sterling and Brittany Hayes stood not far away. as if watching a magnificent farce. Brittany Hayes even leaned against Richard Sterling, letting out a sigh of regret, though the amusement in her eyes couldn't be hidden. Sister, don't be too sad. The dead can't be brought back to life, you know. Besides, wasn't this also your own carelessness? It wasn't until I had put all of Margaret Vance's ashes into a box and was holding it, ready to leave, did I say you could leave? Richard Sterling's cold voice rang out from behind me. He grabbed my arm. His grip was incredibly strong, as if he meant to crush my bones. I still have a use for these ashes. Give them to me now. His tone was forceful, with a hint of impatience. A use? I violently shook off his hand, the fury and hatred that had accumulated in my chest for 2 days completely erupting at this moment. I fiercely protected the urn, my eyes bloodshot as I glared at him, my voice turning sharp with extreme rage. Richard Sterling, have you no humanity? When Margaret Vance was alive, she treated you as his own child. She considered everything for your sake. Don't you know that in your heart? What wrong did she do? Why, even after her death, do you still so maniacally humiliate her? You won't even spare her ashes. I thought that no matter how much of a scoundrel he was, he should at least have a shred of reverence for the deceased, especially an elder who had genuinely cared for him. But I was wrong, profoundly wrong. Facing my accusations, Richard Sterling's face showed not a hint of guilt, but rather a grim, cold sneer. Good to me, he sneered, his laughter filled with disdain and mockery. Eleanor Vance, don't think I don't know what your good Margaret Vance did behind Brittany's back. His eyes were sinister, and he said clearly, word by word, having my son urinate in her ashes was already a favor to her. If it weren't for you, I would have fed her ashes to the dogs long ago. You. What did you say? My voice trembled, barely able to believe my ears. Brittany Hayes walked over, linking her arm through Richard Sterling's, arms crossed. Sister, if it weren't for your mother, Leo would have been aborted long ago. When I was pregnant, she used the excuse of bringing me soup, and actually put abortifacient drugs in it. As she spoke, Brittany Hayes's eyes reddened. If Rick hadn't found out in time, Leo would have already. I clenched my teeth and denied it without thinking. Impossible. Margaret Vance would never do such a thing. Margaret Vance was the gentlest person. Even when she discovered Richard Sterling's infidelity and that another woman was having his child, she merely told me, gently yet firmly, and with unwavering strength, divorce him peacefully, and well live our lives, just the two of us. She never thought of harming anyone else. Richard Sterling, his eyes red, stepped forward and kicked me to the ground. I saw it with my own eyes. How could it be false? Leo wouldn't have been born with a weak constitution and suffer from night terrors if it weren't for that old hag. So your mother's ashes must stay. A tearing pain ripped through my abdomen, but I still clung tightly to Margaret Vance's ashes, refusing to let go. I gritted my teeth. A metallic taste filled my throat. Impossible. I will never let Margaret Vance be humiliated by your bastard. At my words, both Richard Sterling and Brittany Hayes's faces changed. You said who is bastard. Now, kneel and apologize to my Leo. Brittany Hayes glared at me venomously. Not having legitimately borne Richard Sterling's child was a deep pain for her, and at that moment, she naturally hated me to death. I refused. So Richard Sterling stepped forward and pressed down on my neck, with such force that I was utterly powerless to resist. I was forced to kneel and bow my head 3 times to the child in Brittany's arms. My dignity felt as if it had been utterly crushed by them, scattered across the ground, until Richard Sterling flung me away like a rag. Forget it. That old hag's ashes are already dirty, unworthy for my Leo to use. He dragged me into the suburban house. Then you atone for your mother's sins, and wash my son's clothes that he accidentally urinated on. I was shoved to the ground. In front of me was a large basin of children's clothes, covered in disgusting stains. I won't wash them. Dream on. To my surprise, Richard Sterling sneered. If you don't wash them, then I'll really feed your mother to the dogs. I knew he was absolutely capable of doing that. I looked at Richard Sterling's cold eyes, and finally, I succumbed. I didn't want Margaret Vance to find no peace even after death. I crouched down, enduring the nausea as I washed the clothes. Richard Sterling glanced at me with disdain. Wash them properly. If there's even a spot left, you'll lick it clean. With that, he put his arm around Brittany Hayes and went into the living room. Soon intimate sounds came from the living room. They were flirting openly. The sounds reached my ears, making me nauseous in waves. My stomach churned. After much effort, I finished washing and wringing out the large basin of clothes. Brittany Hayes took one out and put it on the child in her arms, holding Margaret Vance's urn. I looked at Richard Sterling weakly. Can I leave now? To my surprise, the next second, I heard Brittany Hayes's piercing scream. What did you put in the clothes? Why is my son breaking out in a rash? Richard Sterling didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, anxiously checking the child in the swaddling clothes. On the child's delicate skin, large, dense patches of red rash rapidly spread, a horrifying sight. His cheeks were flushed crimson, a clear sign of fever. Richard Sterling's eyes were suddenly bloodshot, terrifying. He whirled around, like a cornered beast, grabbing my collar with such force that it almost choked me. What did you do to my son? He roared, spitting in my face. I was choking me, and could only shook my head futilely. Tell me, what did you put in those clothes? Why is Leo like this? His voice was hoarse, filled with brutality. You wretch, how could you harm such a small child? You're as vicious as that old hag, your mother. Every word, like a searing brand, burned into my heart. I didn't do it. I choked out my defense with difficulty. How could I possibly harm an infant? It was something I could never bring myself to do, but my denial, in Richard Sterling's eyes, was nothing more than a weak, pathetic excuse. Richard Sterling stared at me sinisterly, his eyes seemingly wanting to devour me whole. Are you saying Brittany did it? She's Leo's mother. Even a tiger won't eat its cubs. How could she do something to harm her own child? I had no words to defend myself. That's right. Brittany Hayes was the child's biological mother, and that reason alone was enough to clear her of all suspicion. The murderous intent in Richard Sterling's eyes grew stronger. He released my collar, and instead fixed his gaze on the urn I held tightly. Since you're being so ungrateful, then don't blame me for being ruthless. His voice was icy, devoid of warmth. You'll never see your mother's ashes again in this lifetime. I watched him reach out, his target clearly Margaret Vance's urn, intending to snatch it. I instantly panicked. All my reason crumbled at that moment. I beg you, don't touch Margaret Vance's ashes. I really didn't do it. I'll do anything you want, please. I pleaded incoherently, almost collapsing to my knees. Dignity, decorum, seemed so insignificant at this moment. I only wanted to protect Margaret Vance's ashes, to preserve her final peace. Just then, a loud crash came from outside. A black SUV had crashed straight through the main gate and into the living room of the suburban house. The living room's floor-to-ceiling window shattered on impact, glass shards flying everywhere, amidst the dust. The car door was violently pushed open. A tall, slender figure stepped out of the driver's seat. Against the light, his face was obscured, but his familiar aura made me instantly recognize him. It was him. Tears fell without warning. The immense fear and grievances that had built up in my heart found an outlet the moment I saw him appear. Marcus Thorne. My voice choked with sobs. I used all my strength to call out his name. Save Margaret Vance. Quick, save Margaret Vance. Marcus Thorne's gaze quickly swept across the chaotic living room, finally settling on my disheveled appearance and Richard Sterling's ferocious expression. He didn't hesitate for a moment. He lunged forward. Seizing the instant Richard Sterling was stunned by the sudden turn of events. He snatched the ashes from Richard Sterling's hand. At the same time, he became entangled with Richard Sterling. Taking advantage of their struggle, I clutched Margaret Vance's urn tightly, scrambled toward the SUV, pulled open the back door, and slipped inside. Marcus Thorne. Hurry! I urged anxiously. Marcus Thorne disengaged cleanly and got into the car. Amidst the curses of Richard Sterling and Brittany Hayes, the car sped out of the suburban house. Marcus Thorne took me to one of his suburban houses. As soon as we were inside, I could no longer control my emotions, and I hugged Margaret Vance's urn, sobbing loudly. If I hadn't been so blind back then, insisting on marrying that heartless monster, Richard Sterling, how would Margaret Vance have suffered so much? She even had to endure such humiliation after death. I was the one who harmed Margaret Vance. It was all my fault. A pair of warm hands gently rested on my trembling shoulders. Marcus Thorne knelt down and silently pulled me into his embrace. His chest was broad and solid, carrying a faint, clean scent, which strangely soothed my almost shattered emotions. I buried my face in his shoulder and cried out loud, pouring out all my grievances, anger, and despair. After an unknown amount of time, my sobs gradually subsided. I lifted my reddened eyes to thank him. Marcus Thorne, thank you. If it weren't for you. He gazed at me, his deep eyes holding complex emotions, and whispered, I'm sorry, Ellie, I came too late. The suburban house was quiet, with only my soft sobs and the occasional whisper of wind from outside. After a moment of silence, he suddenly spoke, his voice calm and unwavering. What you told me before, does it still stands? He continued, his tone still indifferent. As long as I help you bring down Blackwood Industries, Yoel. I understood instantly. I lifted my head, meeting Marcus Thorne's gaze, my voice firm with unshakable resolve. It still stands, as long as you can help me completely bring down Richard Sterling and his Blackwood Industries. All the shares I hold will be yours. Unexpectedly, Marcus Thorne, after hearing my words, slowly shook his head. Marcus Thorne's gaze locked onto my eyes, and he said clearly, word by word, Eleanor Vance, you'll marry me, won't you? I raised my eyes, looking at Marcus Thorne's deep eyes, which seemed to hold emotions I couldn't decipher. I nodded gently. All right. Richard Sterling's abusive text messages soon arrived. You little wretch, you dare find a man? Just you wait. Divorce. Looks like you already found a lover. Don't let me find out who that man is. I won't let him get away with it. I sneered. Only now did I realize what a double standard Richard Sterling had. He didn't even mention the fact that he had already cheated. Soon, the divorce papers were handed to me, and I signed them without hesitation. Maintaining such a marriage for even one more second felt repulsive to me. The moment I finished signing, Marcus Thorne handed me another document and said softly, I think you might like this. I paused, pulling out the paper, but froze completely after seeing its contents. Richard Sterling is infertile. Marcus Thorne nodded. I looked at him in disbelief. That child, Brittany Hayes, made him fall for the trick. Marcus Thorne nodded. If he knew that the son he desperately protected wasn't his own, his expression would be priceless. Then, Marcus Thorne handed me another contract. I looked closely, and it was Blackwood Industries Group's 20% shares. I stared at him in a daze, as he gently stroked my head, his voice soft. I bought this for you. Adding to the 25% you already hold, you will be the largest shareholder of Blackwood Industries Group. I want Richard Sterling to forever be under your thumb. Tears instantly flowed out. No one had ever done so much for me. A few days later, Blackwood Industries Group convened a shareholder meeting, planning to oust me. When I finally arrived, fashionably late, I saw Richard Sterling sitting in the board member's seat and let out a cold laugh. Richard Sterling saw me and began to mock. What? Did you hide your mother away properly? You'd better hope I don't find them. After all, you brought your lover into my house, and that's not over yet. Now you can get out. Brittany Hayes, who also held 5% of the shares, was seated below Sister. I advise you to leave early, otherwise, things will get ugly later. I sneered back disdainfully at him. You're the one who should get out. I own 40% of the shares, making me the largest shareholder here indeed. The moment I spoke, the boardroom instantly became so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Impossible. Richard Sterling was the first to break the silence. Where did you get the money to buy shares? Eleanor Vance, are you insane? You're actually trying to deceive people at a shareholder meeting. He rushed forward 2 steps, stretching his neck and roaring at me. Aren't you afraid of being exposed and humiliated later? I'm telling you, get out while you still can. Otherwise, don't scream when I make you regret it. Brittany Hayes followed closely. She sneered. Sister, I know you're upset about Margaret Vance, and we all understand, but you shouldn't joke about something like this. This isn't child's play. Indeed, I curled my lips, a hint of coldness spreading in my eyes. This is certainly not child's play. My gaze slowly swept across every shareholder present. Their expressions varied. Some were surprised and doubtful, some were observing, and a few held a hint of imperceptible schadenfreude. Good. I wanted them to clearly see who was the real master here. I couldn't be bothered to waste any more words on them. I simply pulled out the folder I had been holding behind my back. The thick stack of share transfer contracts was mercilessly slammed onto the polished boardroom table. Open your damn eyes. My voice was not loud, yet it carried an irresistible force, clearly reaching every corner of the boardroom. Richard Sterling froze, and stiffly reached out. He disdainfully picked up the top contract, his eyes sweeping over it with contempt, seemingly convinced it was merely a prop for my bluff. However, the next second, the expression on his face, as if frozen, dramatically shifted. The contempt and disdain rapidly vanished like a receding tide, replaced by a look of utter horror. As if he'd seen a ghost, his pupils sharply contracted. as if he wanted to say something, but couldn't utter a single word. How is this possible? He muttered. How could you possibly have so many shares? Seeing his distraught appearance, Brittany Hayes immediately rushed forward in disbelief and snatched the contract from Richard Sterling's hand. Impossible. This must be fake, she shrieked. You're lying. Eleanor Vance, how could you have so much money? These shares, these clearly. The atmosphere in the boardroom turned eerie due to this sudden share contract. Those shareholders who had been watching from the sidelines, and even subtly favoring Richard Sterling, now all changed their expressions. Richard Sterling seemed to have all the strength drained from him. Staggering back a step, almost falling to the ground, he stared at me intensely. His eyes filled with an indescribable complexity of emotions. Anger, resentment, jealousy, but more than anything, a bone-deep fear. He probably never imagined that the woman he once manipulated at will and whose dignity he trampled would one day stand before him with such an assertive demeanor and crush everything he was proud of beneath her feet. Fake. It must be fake. Eleanor Vance, you think you can get away with forging a contract? I sneered. Whether it's real or fake, you can all judge for yourselves. I lightly tapped on the table, my gaze as sharp as a knife. Now, as the largest shareholder of Blackwood Industries Group, I propose we reconsider today's meeting agenda. The first item on the agenda will be the removal of Richard Sterling from all positions within Blackwood Industries Group. My voice was calm, yet it carried an irresistible power, echoing through the silent boardroom. The boardroom door closed heavily behind me. I let out a long breath, my tense nerves relaxing slightly. With Marcus Thorne's help, I had won this crucial first battle. The immense weight on my heart seemed to have been pried open slightly, letting in a glimmer of light. Outside the corporate building, the crowd was bustling. I spotted him at a glance. Marcus Thorne leaned against a sleek black sedan, the afternoon sun outlining his tall, lean figure and handsome profile. He lowered his gaze slightly, lost in thought, an air of aloof dignity radiating from him. Even so, he remained the most striking presence in the crowd, drawing countless passers-by's gazes. Such a pair would be the center of attention anywhere, and at this moment, this focal point was waiting for me. A strange emotion quietly bloomed in my heart, but more than that, an indescribable sense of pride and reassurance. I took a deep breath, walked up to him, and looked up at him. Thank you. 1,000 words, finally condensed into these 3. Without him, I couldn't have reclaimed everything that was mine so easily, nor could I have retaliated so brilliantly. Hearing my voice, Marcus Thorne looked up at me. The gentle smile that bloomed in his previously indifferent eyes, like melting ice. Looks like you played your hand well today, he said, a hint of playfulness in his voice. How should you thank me? Shall I treat you to dinner? I asked tentatively. It was the most direct and sincere way of thanking him I could think of. He had done so much for me, and a single meal was far from enough. Marcus Thorne, however, raised an eyebrow and shook his head. He extended a long finger and lightly tapped his sharply defined profile, his eyes deep, with an undeniable hint of command. Kiss me. My heart skipped a beat, and my cheeks uncontrollably flushed hot. Kiss him. Here? In broad daylight, with people coming and going, I instinctively glanced around, and indeed, many eyes were glancing our way, intentionally or not, filled with curiosity and scrutiny. I bit my lower lip. Ultimately, an inexplicable surge of courage propelled me. I took a deep breath, as if making a firm decision. I slightly tiptoed, and slowly leaned closer to him. Just as my lips were about to touch his cheek, Marcus Thorne casually turned his head slightly, and so, my kiss, perfectly aimed, landed precisely on his thin lips. Time seemed to stand still at that moment. My mind went blank, leaving only the warm, soft sensation on my lips, and his suddenly magnified handsome face. My face burned red hot. What I didn't know was that all of this was witnessed by Richard Sterling. Richard Sterling clenched his fists tightly, his knuckles turning white from the force. A thick, dark color churned in his eyes, mixed with anger, jealousy, and a hint of resentment he hadn't even realized. Even though he and Eleanor Vance were already divorced, this woman, just minutes ago, had snatched everything he had at Blackwood Industries Group with a thunderous force. But why, seeing her so intimate with another man? Did the nameless fire in his chest still burn him so much that his insides burned with pain? Even though he had long ago discarded her like trash. Rick, shall we go home? Brittany Hayes's a timid voice sounded beside him, timidly pulling at his sleeve. Richard Sterling, however, was like ignited dynamite, violently flinging her hand away. Go home by yourself, I have something to do. Brittany Hayes stumbled from his shove, the color draining from her face, her eyes filled with grievance and resentment. She shot a venomous glance in my and Marcus Thorne's direction, her gaze like a poisoned needle, cold and malicious. Finally, she bit her lip and reluctantly turned, leaving first. Her figure disappeared into the crowd, and only then did Richard Sterling stride forward, walking straight towards me and Marcus Thorne. Marcus Thorne, and I heard a chilling voice from behind us. Eleanor Vance. My footsteps paused, and I slowly turned around. Richard Sterling stood a few steps away from us, his face so grim it looked like it could drip water. His gaze was like a viper's gaze, sticky and cold, locking onto me. These tricks you pulled today, he said, enunciating each word, his voice laced with bitter hatred. You'd better not regret them, I'll make you pay for what you've done today. Marcus Thorne instinctively took a step forward, shielding me behind him. I looked at his broad back, and an indescribable warmth surged within me. Since childhood, apart from my mother, no one had ever protected me so unhesitatingly. Richard Sterling saw Marcus Thorne's action. A muscle in his face twitched, and his eyes grew even darker. Eleanor Vance. He spoke again, his tone now condescendingly generous. I'm giving you one last chance. If you kneel down now and kowtow to me in apology, perhaps I can overlook this instance of your ignorance. His face even showed a hint of self-righteous arrogance, as if he was certain I would be humbled by his generosity, and would tearfully beg for his forgiveness. His demeanor almost made me laugh in anger. It had come to this point. Why did he still think I would beg for mercy from him? Who gave him the confidence to think I would be foolish enough to repeat my mistakes and go back to him? Now, all I wished was to be as far away from him as possible. Richard Sterling. I stepped out from behind Marcus Thorne, meeting his bloodshot eyes, my voice calm. I'll give you a chance too. Go to my mother's grave now and kneel for a day and a night to atone for those despicable things you did to her in the past. Then, perhaps I can overlook what you've done to me. Eleanor Vance. Richard Sterling was indeed enraged. Veins bulged on his forehead. You're pushing your luck, I sneered, my gaze contemptuous. You started it, didn't you? Further words were useless. With a person like him, I no longer had the desire to waste another breath. I took Marcus Thorne's hand, turned, and walked away, never looking back at him. Let's go. Richard Sterling furiously punched the nearby tree just now. When he saw Eleanor Vance and Marcus Thorne's intimate moment, he compulsively walked over. He might have even genuinely thought that if she truly bowed her head and admitted her mistake to him, he might truly, generously forgive her. Richard Sterling returned to the suburban house, laden with exhaustion and brutality. The suburban house was quiet, with only the faint sound of her hushed voice coming from the second-floor bedroom. He softened his footsteps, climbing the stairs one by one. Just as he was about to push open the bedroom door, Brittany Hayes's muffled voice drifted out, making him like a lightning strike, frozen in place. What do we do? The older this child gets, the less he looks like him. Sooner or later, it'll be discovered that he's not his. Not his? Richard Sterling's pupils suddenly constricted. What does that mean? Those four words, like a searing hot iron, branded his heart, making his mind roar and go utterly blank. He felt as if all the blood in his body had instantly frozen, his hands and feet turning icy cold. And even his breathing became difficult. He couldn't believe what he had heard. How could this be? From inside the bedroom, Brittany Hayes's voice continued. Who would have thought I was just an accident back then, and ended up pregnant with his child? To find a legitimate father for this child, I had no choice at the time. I could only go to Richard Sterling, that fool, and make him fall for the trick. I used a few tricks, slipped him something, and lied, telling him I got pregnant after that one time. And what happened? He bought it completely. He eagerly married me and even treated this bastard like a treasure. Ha! He's so incredibly stupid. These words, like a loud slap, struck Richard Sterling's face fiercely. Burning with pain, Richard Sterling furiously pushed open the bedroom door. Brittany Hayes was startled, her face turning pale. Rick, why are you back? Richard Sterling, like a demon from hell, walked step by step towards her. I gave you shares. I gave you money to spend. I divorced Eleanor Vance for you, and you actually lied to me. Whose child is this exactly? Speak! Terrifying blood vessels surged in his eyes. As he fiercely gripped Brittany Hayes' throat, Brittany Hayes gasped for breath, choked. I'm sorry, Rick. I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to. Fear flashed in her eyes as she pleaded tearfully. For the sake of all the time I've spent with you, please let me go. Dream on. Richard Sterling raised his hand and slapped her viciously, his hand still fiercely gripping Brittany Hayes' throat. You wretch. You just lied to me. Die, die, die. The next second, Brittany Hayes' struggling feet went still, and she slumped limply into Richard Sterling's arms. He pushed her away with disgust, not a shred of pity in his eyes. A few days later, Blackwood Industries Group suddenly broke out a scandal. An executive had sexually assaulted a disadvantaged student he sponsored. As soon as the news broke, it immediately caused a huge uproar, and Blackwood Industries Group's market value instantly evaporated by more than half. Investors rushed to sell their shares, and shareholders also began selling off their stakes. After all, such a scandal would cling to the company forever. They were all businessmen. No one dared to gamble. But precisely at this moment, Marcus Thorne suddenly acquired a large number of shares, transferring all the stocks and shares he bought under my name, and with 60% of the shares, I had become the true controlling power of Blackwood Industries. Just then, the scandal was clarified. It turned out the disadvantaged student had merely complained that the executive hadn't given him enough money and had deliberately fabricated false news to defame him. For a time, online attention to the matter soared to unprecedented levels, and on the opening day, the stock price surged all the way, hitting the daily limit. In the end, the stock price was even higher than its initial value. Only I knew that all of this was orchestrated by Marcus Thorne, with the sole purpose of making me the controlling power of Blackwood Industries. Meanwhile, Richard Sterling came to find me. His face was unshaven, and his complexion was haggard. Ellie, I know the truth now. It was that wretch Brittany Hayes who deceived me, causing so many misunderstandings between us. Please, just come back to me, okay? And as for that man, I won't blame you. Hearing his words, I could hardly believe my ears. What right did he have to blame me? I looked at him coldly. Have you forgotten how you treated my mother? Was that a misunderstanding too? A flicker of guilt crossed Richard Sterling's eyes. Ellie, Mom is already dead. Don't make such a big deal out of something so small. I apologize. I was too extreme before. Please don't take it to heart. I scoffed. Why shouldn't I mind? Do you really think I can just forget it and reconcile with you? Do you think Margaret Vance can rest in peace, knowing this? Richard Sterling choked on his words, then spoke again. Ellie, you love me. Don't let this minor misunderstanding make you lose your true love, okay? My true love is Marcus, not you. I looked at him and replied firmly. I knew it. Have you been seeing him all along? Since when? Richard Sterling stared at me urgently. Did you know all along that I couldn't have children? I shook my head. No. I only found out a few days ago. You thought he was your son, and he urinated in my mother's urn. I'll never forget that. Richard Sterling, get out now. I don't want to see your face. Before he could finish speaking, the police burst in. We suspect you're involved in a murder case. Please come with us. Richard Sterling was taken away for questioning. Before he left, his gaze held a faint plea as he looked at me. I closed my eyes, pretending not to see. A few days later, the investigation results were released. Richard Sterling admitted to killing Brittany Hayes, then sending her child to foster care, and he would be facing a sentence of over a decade. Meanwhile, I had already changed Blackwood Industries to Eleanor Corp. Marcus Thorne and I held a grand wedding, and at the ceremony, Marcus Thorne looked at me tenderly. Will you marry me? He held my hand, and my heart raced. When I knew I would be entering married life with Marcus Thorne, I felt nothing but anticipation, so I nodded firmly. I do. The next moment, a ring was slipped onto my ring finger, and he stepped forward to embrace me. A sustained ovation erupted from the audience. Suddenly, Margaret Vance's favorite lilies on the stage swayed as if moved by an unseen breeze. I couldn't help but smile, looking at them. Mom, I know you'd be happy for me.